Good evening. Howdy. He gets it. Folks in Texas say howdy. They don't say hello. So Dr. Bullard completely gets it. He's chuckling down here. Good evening. My name is Eric Walsh-Buhai. I'm a professor in the School of Public Health, and I'd like to welcome you all this evening to the second event being conducted in the School of Public Health Student Council Spring Speaker Series. I'd first like to recognize the fact that this is a student-run event. This is a super big deal. This student council has been very successful over the years since I've been here. I arrived here in about 5 years ago, and every year the student council has received some funds through the student success fee to put on this spring speaker series. Let me just take a pulse check of who's here. So first, School of Public Health or other faculty and staff, stand up. No, this is public health, so we're going to get moving. So stand up, please. Faculty, staff, very good. Okay, welcome. Okay, sit down. All right, students. Students, stand up. Let yourself be seen. All right. Community. Not affiliated with San Diego State at all. Community members. Great. Welcome to campus. And how about one of my favorite parts, alumni? Fantastic. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us. So as I mentioned, this is a series that's put together by the School of Public Health Student Council. The council is a group of students working to organize a variety of events and programs for SDSU students, especially School of Public Health students, faculty, and alumni. Their real goal is to connect students with networking opportunities, professional experiences, and personal relationships. President Maddie Anderson, I don't think is here. Vice President Tony Clark, where's Tony? Right here. Tony. Secretary Victoria Trung, is Victoria here? No. Treasurer Sarah Norwood by the desk. Hi, Sarah. PR Chair Jenna Guerrero, I don't think is here. Events Chair Kai Roach. Epi Biostats Division Representative Brian Jimenez. Hi, thanks for coming. All right. Environmental Health Division Representative Jade Wong. Yay! And Jade will come up here in a moment. Health Management and Policy Division Representative Christine Sitson. Is Christine here? And then Health Promotion and Behavioral Sciences Division Representative Melanie Amaker. This group put together a phenomenal speaker series, and it continues tonight with Dr. Bullard. It got kicked off last week, and let me just give you an idea of how successful they've been. So this Student Success Fee program was started about 5 years ago. It is super competitive. So this year, so the 2018-2019, there were 228 student submissions to the Student Success Fee program. 100 submissions were funded. Anybody do the math in their head? That's a 44% response success rate. And so just to show you, there were $1.5 million worth of funds that were requested that were funded, and this group was funded for a little over $70,000. So I just want to acknowledge the Student Council's efforts in this. And on behalf of the School of Public Health, welcome. I look forward to a great evening. Again, I welcome to sunny Southern California, Dr. Bullard. Jade, come on.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming to our 2019 Spring Speaker event. My name is Jade Wong, and I'm excited to introduce our special speaker for tonight. Tonight's speaker is known as a father of environmental justice, and he's currently a distinguished professor of urban planning and environmental policy at Texas Southern University. He's an award-winning author of 18 books that address topics ranging from sustainable development, environmental racism, and much more. Among all his accomplishments, he's also a U.S. Marine Corps veteran and the first African-American to win the Sierra Club John Muir Award. It is my great honor for me to present to you Dr. Robert Bullard. And also as a reminder, for everyone that try to refrain from flash photography and then audio and visual recordings, we're going to archive all of this presentation so you can see it later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I want to first thank the students for organizing this event and for a winning proposal. And again, I am really pleased to be here in sunny San Diego. I left Houston. It was warm and sunny, 78. But again, it's good to be back in California. I used to be in California in the 90s. I was first at Berkeley and then Riverside, UCLA. And I enjoyed my stay in California. This evening, I'm going to give you a talk on the quest for environmental justice, why health matters. My job is to connect the dots. And I'm a sociologist by training, and sociologists are good at making the connection between individuals, organizations, institutions, societies. And I'm also going to run through some of the, highlights and try to connect the various subjects that I've worked on, taught, researched, working with communities. I've written 18 books, but it's just one book, but don't tell anybody. All of the glue that connects all those books, fairness, justice, and equity, whether it's dealing with housing, transportation, energy, disaster, whether it's dealing with smart growth, or topics ranging from the smallest neighborhood unit to how these things connect globally. The word for the day is intersectionality. That's our word for the day, how things connect. And looking at the environment and how environmentalism was practiced for decades and maybe centuries, that somehow left out a whole segment of the population. And as was said, Sierra Club was founded way back in the 1880s. Teddy Roosevelt and a whole bunch of folks got together and said we need to start a conservation movement. And so the idea of the environment being out there and wilderness, hinterland, I think to a large extent cities, urban, and the impact of the built environment was somehow, on people, was somehow given a footnote. And so what the environmental justice movement did is to kind of like redefine environmentalism and to look at the relationship of humans to the environment and looking at various diverse communities and humans, how they interact with each other. That's how the sociology got into the environment. So redefining environments where we live, work, play, learn, worship, as well as the physical and natural world. And what the environmental justice movement did is to flip the dominant paradigm of environmental protection on its head. The dominant paradigm exploits vulnerable population, concentrates poverty and pollution, legitimates human exposure to dangerous chemicals, subsidizes ecological destruction, institutionalizes unequal protection, trades human health for profits, places the burden of proof on the victims, builds industry around risk, whether it's risk management, risk assessment, and fails to use prevention and precautionary principle as the dominant strategy. So, what is environmental justice? Environmental justice embraces the principle that all communities are entitled to equal protection of our environmental, housing, transportation, employment, education, civil rights, human rights laws. All those things. Equal protection when we talk about the issue of environmental justice. And so to a large extent, when we talk about the environment, we're bringing all the pieces together. We're connecting all of the various parts in terms of the ecological system as well as the sociological systems as well as political systems, etc. So when we talk about this whole issue of all communities not being created equal, and that if a community happens to be poor, working class, or physically located on the wrong side of the tracks or some other barrier, whether it's visible, whether it's a wall. No, I shouldn't say that because I'm not saying that. So some people have the wrong complexion for protection, and that's what environmental justice aims to fix. Environmental racism, when that was coined way back in the 80s, Dr. Benjamin Chavis, people say, well, you can't talk about race and environment. The environment is neutral. The environment is objective. Everybody's impacted the same by what happens in the environment. Wrong. Environmental racism refers to any policy, practice, or directive that differentially affects or disadvantages, whether intended or unintended, individuals, groups, or communities based on race or color. Now, we all know that there's discrimination in housing still, in education, employment. There's also discrimination in the way that environmental policies, programs, directives, regulations, laws are applied. So when we talk about, this whole question of something being legal or something being immoral and unethical, when we talk about environmental racism kills. It hurts. It makes people sick. When you don't enforce the laws, just because somebody is of a different racial ethnic, or somebody is poor, or somebody basically is physically located in a geographic area that's isolated, whether it's a rural area isolated, or whether it's on the U.S.-Mexican border, or whether it's in urban areas. So when we talk about space, place, and race, these things are connected. My job is to unpack these policies. Racism and Unequal Protection. This is a book, Confronting Environmental Racism, Voices from the Grassroots. This is a book I wrote in 1991 or 92, I forget. And the cover of that book is actually, these are Native Americans in Mississippi. A lot of people didn't know that there are Native Americans in Mississippi, but this company found them and was trying to put a hazardous waste incinerator on the reservation. This is in Mississippi. And the community fought, said, no, you're not going to build this on the reservation. And they defeated it. And this is a photograph that was in the paper in Jackson, Mississippi. And I said, damn, that's a great photograph. That should be on a book. And so, again, these are voices. And this book was different in that what we did was capture stories as told by the actual people doing the work with a very light editorial pen. And so these were people telling their stories, how they were able to overcome racism and from coast to coast. Place matters, and social inequality matters. All places are not created equal, and all space is not created equal. On Equal Protection, Environmental Justice, and Communities of Color. This is a book that I wrote, and it's published by Sierra Club. Sierra Club. I used to jam the Sierra Club stickers. I used to, just harass them and just talk about them, doing great coffee table books. Oh, they've been around for all these years. They do great books, beautiful books. And I said, it's time for Sierra Club to do a real book about struggle, about justice, about people fighting, out there, just out there trying to get some justice. And they said, okay, you got anything? And of course, I had all 14, 15 chapters ready to rock and roll, lock and loaded. And so when we talk about environmental justice and communities of color, and we talk about historically, there's a relationship between exploitation of land and exploitation of people. I'm sure you know that. And the places on this earth that's where you have people that have been historically exploited, and oftentimes for the resources, you also find that these oftentimes are also the most environmentally degraded. When you degrade the land, you degrade and disrespect the people, you end up with environmental injustice. Some communities have the wrong complexion for protection. This is a book that a colleague and I wrote in 2012 after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, and we wanted to know, was the response to Hurricane Katrina, or the lack of response, or the slow response, a fluke? I think most of you were born when Katrina hit 2005. Raise your hand if you're not. Okay. So we're safe. And so what we did is we looked at government response to natural and man-made disasters from the 20s up until 2010, the BP spill. So 8 decades. And what we found, and it took us 300 pages plus to come up with this whole idea, has the government response to natural and man-made disasters been fair? That's a question that we're still asking. Will the government response to climate change be fair if we don't insist that equity be at the core? So we looked at 8 decades of government response to natural man-made disasters, starting with the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 and bringing it all the way up to BP spill, looking at disasters when it comes to heat waves and floods and hurricanes and wildfires and you name it. And we basically concluded that the answer is no. Most likely won't be fair unless fairness becomes a core principle. 1979 is the year that I got involved in the work on environmental justice. I graduated from Iowa State University in 1976, and my wife and I, we moved to Houston, Texas, and I was an assistant professor of sociology at Texas Southern University, same university I'm teaching at now. This is way back in 1979, long time ago, ancient. And one day my wife came home and said, Bob, I've sued the state of Texas, the Texas Department of Health. I work for a state university, so she technically sued my employer. No tenure, untenured, just 3 years out of graduate school. And she said, okay. I said, okay, you sued who now? Okay. She said, I sued this company. I won't call their name, but the initials are BFI. I sued this company, second largest waste disposal company in the world, because they're trying to put this sanitary landfill in the middle of this predominantly black, middle-class suburban neighborhood in Houston. Sanitary landfill. I said, oh, there's nothing sanitary about a landfill. We all know that. When you bag the garbage, put it in a can, or you recycle whatever, what's left goes to a landfill. It doesn't go to heaven. And so we said, she said, I need somebody who can find out where all the landfills, incinerators, and solid waste facilities are in Houston, because I need to file this temporary restraining order to sue this company in the city and in the county and the state to try to stop this landfill from being sited in this community. And I need somebody to put all this information on a map and say who lives wherever, because I need to try to stop this thing, because this community is counting on me. And I said, you need a sociologist. She said, that's what you are, right? I said, yeah. Before, she had no idea what I did. She knew I went to work every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday. I came back home, and once a month I got paid. Other than that, she knew kind of what I did, but I said, no, you need a sociologist that can plot, map, and put all this stuff on poster board and lay it out. Now, this is before iPads, iPhone, laptops, desktop computers. This is 1979. Ancient. She filed a lawsuit, Bean versus Southwestern Waste Corporation. First lawsuit in the United States to challenge environmental discrimination using civil rights law. Oh, let me back up. I documented this work in a book that I wrote called Invisible Houston, The Black Experience in Boom and Bust. This is the landfill sign. Get the name, Whispering Pines. Sounds like a subdivision. I love to live in Whispering Pines. It's such a beautiful subdivision. It's a landfill. The gentleman that's protesting with his back turned, he was a young justice of the peace, Al Green. He's a congressman, Al Green. Now, he's my congressman. And there's a big protest. And the Bean case basically was a case study in environmental racism being challenged as a civil rights issue. And so I had 10 students in my research methods class. We collected the data. We had maps, flat maps, magic markers, map pens, color coding. I said, it's so easy to do now with GIS, and you can do it on the phone. Cell phone. But anyway, and I published a study. I did the study in 1979 and published it in Sociological Inquiry in 1983. The study showed that 100% of all city-owned landfills were located in predominantly black neighborhoods, 5 out of 5. 3 out of 4 of the privately owned landfills were in black neighborhoods. And 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators were in black neighborhoods. 3 out of 4 were the privately owned. 82% of all the waste dumped in Houston from the 30s up until 1978 were in neighborhoods where blacks were the majority, even though blacks made up only 25% of the population. So you're getting oversaturated with other people's garbage. You're going to see this 1979 study and the analysis and the findings writ large over the last 40 years. It's pretty common data now, analyses. But back then, nobody believed it. Everybody knew it. If you lived in a black neighborhood, you lived it 24/7. You know where the garbage is. You know the aroma. That's not coffee. That's the smell of garbage. 1982 is when the environmental justice movement took off. Warren County, when this company got this oil, they tried to recycle it. They couldn't because the law had changed, and they dumped it on the highways. 1978. They cleaned it up. They cleaned the highways up. They needed a place to put it. They decided one of the poorest counties, predominantly black county, rural in North Carolina, with a resting place, Warren County. People said no. They protested, got arrested. They said no. Young people, children, high school kids, laying their bodies in front of trucks. There's a picture of Dr. Benjamin Chavis there, coined the term environment. He said this is environmental racism. Polychlorinated biphenyl. PCBs, nasty stuff. Not something you want to sprinkle on your Cheerios. Young people saying no. Young people have always been part of struggle movements, students. All progressive movements that have been successful in this country have had a strong youth and student component. 1983 is when the General Accounting Office, at the behest of the Congressional Black Caucus, produced a report citing of hazardous waste landfills and their correlation with racial and economic status of surrounding communities. What this report found is that 75% of all the hazardous waste facilities in the South, 8 states in Region 4, were in black communities. Blacks only made up 21% of the population, but you got 75% of the waste facilities. That's a disproportionate impact. 1987 is when the United Church of Christ produced the first national study looking at hazardous waste and race in the United States. And when they did the analysis, it was not income, it was not property values, it was not whether or not people own their homes. It was race. Race was the most potent predictor. When they ran the regression analysis and they isolated the various variables, race popped up as having the most explanatory power. 1990 is when I said, I want to expand the study that I did in Houston and look across the South and find out is what happened in Houston happening in other parts of the country. And so I wrote a book. Well, I wrote a manuscript, and I sent it to a whole bunch of publishers. Got rejection. One rejection after another. You know, rejection is a mother. And I said, okay, somebody's going to publish my book. Sent it out in 89. And this company, publisher in Boulder, Colorado, Westview Press. You know, Boulder is different. I don't know if you ever been to Boulder. Boulder's different. You know, I don't know if it's mountain high air and tofu, bean sprouts, marijuana, but they published the book. And Dumping and Dixie basically said, in the South, there's something going on that's causing all of the things that other people don't want just happen to be pushed off on poor communities and black communities. And that's Dixie. Now we know Dixie is not just the South. Dixie can be expanded across the U.S. and across the globe. The concept of communities that basically have been targeted for dumping. 1991 is when we had a conference at the University of Michigan. University of Michigan, Paul Mohai and Bunyan Bryant organized a conference at the University of Michigan and invited a few of us academics who were working on the intersection of environment and race. It was just a few of us. And we were in that photo in the back. Young. Hair is black. Well, some of us had hair back then. But again, it was just a handful of folks, you know, a dozen or so that were working on these issues. We had the conference and looking at this whole idea of race and the incidence of environmental hazards and health. And we call ourselves the Michigan Group, even though it was held at the University of Michigan. University of Michigan right now is unique in that it offers a master's and PhD in the School of, they changed the name, Sustainability and Environment. They offer environmental justice PhD. Very good program. I recommend it for those who may not be familiar with it, but it's a very good program. 1991 is also the year that United Church of Christ, under the leadership of Dr. Benjamin Chavis at the Commission for Racial Justice, organized the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. The summit was organized by and for people of color. It was 4 days, and the first 2 days was just people of color, African Americans, Latinos, Asian and the Pacific Islanders, Native and Indigenous people. We say we, as people of color, we have to unpack baggage of slavery, imperialism, colonialism, and all those other isms before we can meet with white people. Because African Americans don't know that much about Native Americans. Don't know that much about, Asian and Pacific Islanders. So there's a lot of stereotypes and mistrust among people of color. So we're going to unpack that. We're going to let it out, let it all out on the table. No hidden agendas. And then when we get ourselves together, understanding that people of color must come together if we are to address many of the issues that uniformly impact us in a special way. But after those first 2 days, then we're going to open it up so that everybody is in the room talking about developing our environmental justice agenda. We developed 17 principles of environmental justice. We organized for 500 people. 1,000 people showed up. And anytime you got 1,000 people in Washington, D.C. talking about environmental justice, you have to have a march. That's in the book. That's mandatory. We marched all the way up to, from the Washington Court Hotel. We marched all the way up to the nation's capital. We had a big march on the, speeches on the Capitol. And then we marched back. Nobody got arrested. Very, organized, uniform, very disciplined. And then we had our meeting. We developed 17 principles of environmental justice. The first principle is that most people must speak for themselves, and that the most impacted must be in the room when decisions are being made. Bob Bullard does not speak for any community, any frontline community. If a community wants me to work with them, I stand with them. If they want me to assist and support research, I do that. But I do not speak for. So when we talk about the first principle of environmental justice, that holds true right now. These big environmental groups cannot speak for frontline communities that are being impacted by pollution or being impacted by climate. Communities on the front line must speak for themselves, and they need to be resourced with dollars so that they can speak for themselves. 1992 is when we forced the EPA to produce a document, to produce a report that looked at environmental justice and communities of color. Back then in 92, the Environmental Protection Agency under William Riley as the EPA administrator and under George Herbert Walker Bush, Daddy Bush, they didn't like the term environmental justice. They were more comfortable with environmental equity. And what we said, we are not talking about equity when it comes to pollution. We're not talking about giving white folks, the same amount of pollution that people of color get. That's not equity, that's madness. We want justice. We want to make sure that when we talk about the application of environmental laws, the laws are enforced equally across the board. No look the other way policy. And so they produced this report in 1992, Environmental Equity, Reducing Risk for All Communities. And this was the first federal report that looked at environmental justice across the board in the United States. And what they found that what we have been saying all along, that communities of color are disproportionately impacted. Poor communities are disproportionately impacted. 1993, already did that. 1994 is when we got the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, instead of doing this 100 scientists go in a meeting and talk about environment, health, and race, we said we don't want to do that. I got invited and 2 other environmental justice folks got invited. And the rest, the other 97 people, were environmental scientists. We said, no, we want community people. We said, take this year to plan a real symposium. And so we did a 1 year to plan this symposium. It was an interagency symposium, Health and Research Needs to Ensure Environmental Justice. And we had it in Crystal City, Arlington. And it was 1,000 people attended, and at least 300 of those participants were grassroots community groups that we were able to fight for and get scholarships for the folks to come to those meetings, because grassroots folks can't fly to D.C. and be up there for no 4 days. They don't have money to do that. So we fought for scholarships for our grassroots community folks. And then the second day of the conference, a few of us got a call. This is before cell phones now. We got calls from the lobby saying, come to the phone, you got a message. And a few, I got one of those calls. Come to the front desk, I suppose you have a call. And the caller supposedly was from the White House. I'm like, yeah, right. It turned out to be true, but I thought it was a joke. And this was February 11, 1994, and President Clinton and Vice President Al Gore invited us to come up to the White House to witness the signing of the Executive Order 12898. And that's a picture of the signing. That's President Clinton at the desk. We're gathered around. I'm standing next to EPA Administrator Carol Brown, who has a blue jacket on, and Vice President Gore. That's the Oval Office. Nice office. 1999, we said we want very smart people to do this study. We want the National Academy to do a study on environmental justice and health. And the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy, did that study in 1999. And what they found is that people of color in low-income communities are exposed to higher levels of pollution than the rest of the nation. These groups also contract certain diseases more than affluent white communities. We said, we want you to we want you to study and come up with the findings, and they found the same thing that we had found. Very smart people, National Academy. You don't just walk into the National Academy. But they found the same thing. We said, thank you. It's important for smart people to say it, because messengers oftentimes can be as important as the message. You know that. We knew that. And so in 2002 is when we had the second summit. We were supposed to have it in 2001, but we couldn't raise the money. So we raised the money, and then we said what we're going to do is we're going to honor the backbone of our movement. We honored 12 women, one for each month. African American, Latino, Latina, Native and Indigenous, Asian and Pacific Islanders. And this is such a great photograph. I mean, we have some of the top leaders, women, backbone of our movement, still the backbone of the environmental justice movement. 2003, it took 21 years before that Warren County landfill was to be detoxified and cleaned up. 21 years. They said it would never leak. It leaked in 2 years. Even in this county, after all that period of time, the county is still poor. It's still black. There's no hospital. People have to drive 20, 25 miles to get to the hospital. If you're sick and there's an emergency, you die. So environmental justice is not just a slogan. So I'm going to give you some run through quickly some of the examples of environmental justice struggles that I worked on personally, as an expert witness, as a technical support advisor, etc. 80s, 90s, and 2000s. This is a lead smelter in West Dallas poisoning public housing residents, just poisoning. Every kid in that project was poisoned. Lawsuit, cleaned up, I think like a $30-something million settlement. Sounded like a lot of money. That was the 80s. Here's an example where in Texarkana, Texas, middle-income houses built on top of an old dump, wood treatment dump. And they fought to get relocated, and I helped in terms of doing surveys. You know, they had the Army Corps of Engineers, this is one of the first relocations they were supposed to do. They didn't know what the hell they were doing. They wrote letters to the residents. This is a black community, a resident saying, I'm not coming down here from Dallas to Texarkana, which is like, an hour and a half, 2-hour drive every week for you to, not take a settlement. They were forcing people, threatening people, intimidating elderly people who are on their homes, saying you got to take the settlement. And so we're able to push back on that to get people real settlements for relocating from that Superfund site. This is the case in Pensacola, Florida, where there's another middle-class black community that was built on top of a Superfund site or an old site. And this little lady, Ms. Margaret Williams, retired school teacher, take no prisoner, Marine Corps type. She fought for it, and we got the EPA to have this Superfund Relocation Planning Committee. The environmental justice leaders from all over the country, we came to Pensacola, we had this hearing, they were able to get this community relocated. This is a relocation in Norco, Louisiana. The old Diamond Plantation. This is a community that bought land from the plantation Massa, the owner. Back in the 1860s when they were freed, they bought the land, they settled there, and the chemical company came in there later, sat on top of them, and this Diamond community was relocated. It was sandwiched between two refineries, two Shell refineries, and Margaret Richard was the leader. As a matter of fact, Margaret won the Goldman Prize from some few years back. Calumet City, I worked on a case in Calumet City. Luke Cole up in Kern County, I forget. This is when I was in California then. And we had a big rally up in Calumet City. We had the band playing, and I'm out there, rallying and getting ready to grab a guitar and start playing. No, I don't play guitar. But anyway, this is Calumet City, and same kind of thing. Over, waste management and problems of that facility being placed in the middle of farm work community, big problem. This is a case where we're trying to get a whole community relocated HUD housing. And this is a agricultural street landfill. This is New Orleans before Katrina, years and years. Betsy, Hurricane 1965, debris was put in that area and in a landfill, and then later houses was built on top of it. And again, this is another case where I worked on, this company was trying to put a privately owned uranium enrichment plant in the middle of these two little black communities in Louisiana. Citizens Against Nuclear Trash was the group. Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund was a lawyer. I was one of the expert witnesses. LES, Louisiana Energy Service, was a big conglomerate group. This company spent $35 million trying to get this permit. We're able to defeat it, and this is a celebration at the black church, and there's a coffin on there. It says LES, June 9th, 1989, May 2nd, 1997. It took that long to fight, but we won. These things take a long time sometimes, but you have to persist. This is not a sprint. It's like a marathon when you're working on these issues. I worked on another project in New Mexico. This is Church Rock, New Mexico, and Crown Point. This company was trying to build uranium mining on the reservation, in the eastern part of the Navajo Reservation, Dene Tribe, where their water is already contaminated with uranium. People have to drive 15, 20 miles to get water in big tankers. And they're talking about trying to get another a mine going. This case lasted 20 years. It has not been built. They're still fighting. There's a case in Louisiana, Shintech. Japanese company want to build a polyvinyl chloride plant in the middle of this little black community called Convent. This lady holding the sign is Imelda West, 75-year-old great-grandmother, another take-no-prisoner Marine Corps type. Never give up. She went out, Greenpeace was able to fund her to go all the way to Tokyo. And she met with the CEO of the parent company of Shintech. And of course, she's very religious, and she's upriver in Louisiana. And she went there and spoke to the president, CEO, and she put the cross on him. You will not, in the name of Jesus, locate in Convent. And of course, they have Christianity, and also down in Louisiana, they have this other stuff. Then she threw some dust on him. No, that's urban legend. Shintech did not locate in Convent. BP Spill worked on that case where we were asking, where's all that waste when it gets cleaned up? Where's it going? Because it's billions. I mean, it's just gallons, millions and millions of gallons, 200 million gallons crude spill, 1.8 million of dispersant, and it covered 1,000 miles contaminated. We said, where's it going? Nobody knew. They knew it was going to a landfill. We said, where are the landfills at? Where are the landfills? They say it's in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida. They said, where? They said, we don't know. So people looked at me like, well, you got to find out where they are. So we went back to the office with my GIS person. We start cranking out numbers, and lo and behold, we basically said they located mostly in black communities in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida. Blacks only made up 22% of the coastal county population that was impacted by the BP spill, but 60% of the waste was going to landfills in black communities. And we said no. And we confronted the Army Corps, EPA, Coast Guard, the General Command, and we said, you have an executive order that says you're not supposed to be disproportionately impacting low-income and minority population. That's the executive order. And they said, oh, you're right. They wrote a letter, and they said, we have to correct that. You have to understand, sometimes research can be powerful in the hands of community groups to support struggle. Poison wells in Dixon, Tennessee. This is one I worked on for 9 years, and keep my fingers crossed. I think there's a movie getting ready to be made on this one. This is a case in Dixon, Tennessee, where this black community found it right after, it's been 5 generations. Once again, bought land from the plantation type, and this company dumped waste, TCE, trichloroethylene, nasty stuff. You public health folks know this, nasty stuff. In this landfill that's located 54 feet from this black community. All the landfills in Dixon County, Tennessee are located in black community. Blacks only make up 4.5% of the population in the county. Well, how can everything, landfills, solid waste facilities, transfer station, recycling center, all that's in that one little area. And this is Dixon County landfill. And again, the TCE got into the groundwater and contaminated these black families' wells. And it also contaminated white people's wells and springs. And the state and the city wrote letters to the white family and said, don't drink the water, don't bathe in the water, don't cook with it, we'll get you bottled water. And they They did. They gave, and they put the white families on city water. The black families' wells were contaminated first. They said, we found this stuff in your well, and no health effects. No health effects. They drank this water contaminated with TCE from 1988 until 2000. 12 years drinking contaminated water. They posted signs in the white family's yard about the TCE contamination. No such thing for white family. Letters, black and white. We got letters. We got smoking guns. Lawsuit was settled. But it took 9 years. And the company, for 54 feet, they tested, the U.S. Geological Survey did a well dye study to find out what the hydrology is. They actually sent dye down a well, testing well that was on the side of the landfill with black dye to see where it would flow. They didn't test the black family's well that was 54 feet where it was discovered. They tested wells, all the wells and springs within a 2-mile radius. They tested duck ponds. They tested the dog pound, where there are 300 dogs a month or a year. I forget which one it is. Dogs waiting to be euthanized. They gave these dogs clean water, but would not give it to black families. Lawsuit was settled in 2011. The city and the county spent $5 million fighting this black family. $5 million of tax dollars. This black family owns 150 acres of farmland. This is environmental racism. Here's a study that just came out today at 3 o'clock. And I was called and I had to get up and give a comment. White consumption is killing people of color. This is a study that just came out that says that tracked what whites buy and how much it costs in terms of air pollution, PM 2.5. And as it turns out, whites experience 17% less pollution caused by their consumption of goods and services, whereas blacks and Hispanics experience a 56% and 63%, respectively, more pollution than their consumption would generate. In other words, the things that white people buy, because of their income and their consumption pattern, they're more likely to experience a pollution advantage, whereas blacks and Hispanics are more likely to experience a pollution burden. Now, this study, I was asked to comment, and I said this study basically confirms and reaffirms what we've been saying the last 40 years, that environmental degradation is not randomly distributed. The benefits and the costs are not randomly distributed. If you look at toxic waste and race, when we updated the study 20 years later, we found that people of color represent 56% of the residents who live within a 2-mile radius of these facilities, the most dangerous facilities. When you add 2 or more, that number jumps to 69%. Dirty power plants, coal plants, again, 68% of the residents who live within a 30-mile radius of dirty coal plants are African Americans, compared to 56% of whites. If you look at the geography of where oil refineries are located, there are 150 in the country, spread in 32 states. People of color represent 50% of the residents who live in the proximity of these facilities that pose the greatest cancer risk. Over half. California is, you know where the refineries, you go up to Richmond, you go to Wilmington, South Bay, you start looking, up Martinez. I mean, it's not random. And you can see where, I live, in Louisiana, Mississippi, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas. You see what the concentration are. And so when you start looking at these trick photography, no, it's not trick photography, it's real. I mean, kids playing across from refineries. There's no buffer. Across the fence. This is Houston. This is Corpus Christi, Texas. This is Norco, Louisiana, that I was telling you about, that's relocated. This park is sandwiched between two refineries, Shell refineries. The message is very clear that some communities don't count, and their health can be imperiled. This is Baytown, Texas, one of the largest refineries in the country. These pictures go on. This is, what is that? Texas. Port Arthur, Texas. Neighborhoods are killing us. Even breathing is risky. America is segregated, and so is pollution. The University of Minnesota study found that people of color breathe 38% more polluted air than whites. People of color are exposed to 46% more nitrogen oxide than whites. If you look at this Harvard study, 2017, found that African Americans are nearly 3 times more likely to die from exposure to airborne pollutants than other Americans. 200,000 people die each year because of air pollution. Living with more pollution, pollution is not randomly distributed. Blacks are 79% more likely than whites to live in the neighborhoods that pose the greatest risk from industrial pollution. This is 19 states for black, 12 states for Hispanics or Latinos, and 7 states for Asians. And it's not just a poverty thing. Affluent African Americans are more likely to live in neighborhoods that are more polluted, that is, affluent, $50,000 to $60,000. Might not sound like a lot of money in California, but affluent African Americans, middle income, are more likely to live in neighborhoods that are more polluted than whites who make $10,000 on average. How can that be? Residential segregation, housing discrimination. This is an EPA study just last year. It says in 46 states, people of color live with more pollution than whites. In 46 states, African Americans are exposed to 1.54 times more fine particulate matter than whites. For Hispanics, it's 1.2 times. Pollution at risk. The most at risk, we know who they are, children. A third of our schools are located in that hot zone for chemical spills, explosions. We talk about children being, at risk, elevated, and the fact that children are not little adults and they're more vulnerable. This is a school in Houston, Cesar Chavez High School. We know who goes to that school. Across from a refinery. If you look at traffic pollution, this is a California study, showing that more pollution near schools, highways. Big problem with pollution and transportation. Air toxics linked to student performance. California studies, Michigan studies in Texas showing that pollution is not good when it comes to academic performance and achievement. When you close these dirty power plants, studies showing that emergency visits go down. Not rocket science. You lower the pollution levels and you eliminate some of these emissions, you increase the likelihood that people are not going to have these episodes. Plant and pollution, closing plants also tied to premature births. People are getting healthier when you stop polluting. Asthma rates, asthma is not, randomly distributed. Asthma also has environmental links, but it's also, in terms of race and ethnicity and class, African Americans are almost 3 times more likely than whites to die from asthma. Black children are 4 times more likely to be admitted to hospital. And African American children have an asthma death rate 10 times that of non-Hispanic whites. Babies poisoned in the womb. Pollution is not just children, but it's also children. It's also babies before they're even born in terms of the impact of pollution on children, babies, and as children grow in terms of hypertension. And so when we talk about these issues, the implications of vulnerable population, if you are already overpolluted, you don't have a lot of resources, and you're sick, then climate change is going to increase that vulnerability. All the studies show that climate change will increase vulnerability, and it's not random. And we talk about the health effects, the health impacts. It's very predictable as to who's going to get hit the hardest and the worst and the longest. And the mere fact that these things are are predictable, but they're also preventable. And when we talk about vulnerable places, vulnerable people, we know where the emphasis needs to be placed when we talk about trying to address many of the harms that will flow from climate. The most vulnerable regions of the country and the most vulnerable populations, we can map all of that in terms of, if you look at the regions that have the largest billion-dollar severe weather events, climate-related, 1980 to 2012, the darker the area, the more intense the negative impacts of climate, severe weather events. You can look at the 90s and you can look at the 2000s. As the areas get darker brown, you can see that you're having more intense billion-dollar events occurring. Climate change will exacerbate existing inequalities and worsen vulnerabilities of already marginalized populations, where we talk about heat stress, and there are some good studies coming out of California, Rachel Morel-Frost up at Berkeley, and some very good folks doing work on heat islands and showing the racial and ethnic disparities, looking at the impact of land use, residential segregation, the amount of foliage, green, etc., trees and green cover. I mean, all these things impact outcomes, health outcomes. Climate change will exacerbate existing environmental disparities. You're going to have more bad air days in places that are experiencing lots of problems. It's going to get worse. In other places where the problem, people may not see it as a problem, now it will. They're going to have some issues when it comes to air quality. And so when we talk about air pollution, unequal burden, air pollution already has an unequal burden on poor people because of where we live. If you look at people of color bear the greatest burden of pollution in California as well as across the country. Climate change will hit poor people and people of color in the southern United States hardest. This is a study from Berkeley. Shows that if we do nothing, no climate action, we'll lose 6% GDP nationally. If we do nothing, the South will be hit the hardest. We're talking about a 20% drop. In a country that's the poorest, will be hit the hardest. I mean, that's like taking, you got $1 and you're taking 40 cents from $1. Or you got $100, you take 40 cents. That's the difference. The hot spots, you can see get the dark brown. Climate gap will widen income gap. Climate change will widen income and wealth gap. The wealth gap is already the widest in the South. Of the 20 states with the highest income inequality, 11 of them are in the southern United States. And this is a map. The dark brown represents where it's harder to move from the lowest income level moving higher. We're talking mobility, income mobility. Disasters widen racial wealth gap. There's a study that showed that after disasters occur and recovery dollars go in, the recovery dollars flow to mostly affluent and white communities. And these huge $10 billion disasters, on average, white communities gain at least $126,000, whereas communities of color lose $29,000. So money follows money, money follows power, and money follows wealth when it comes to who gets the recovery dollars. Racial wealth gap is already wide right now. African Americans' wealth is only 1/10 of that of whites. Buyout disasters, again, there's another study just came out showing that most FEMA buyouts were neighborhoods where 85% of the residents were white. And again, I had to evacuate during Harvey. I worked with a lot of evacuation, but it's different when you have to leave. Again, that's the dominant paradigm. Some communities have the wrong complexion. The politics of place, the geographic footprint of racism, the stamp. This is the 1860 map. The red represents where African Americans are located. Red is slave states. This is 1950 Jim Crow map. This is a 2010 map of the U.S. Mostly African Americans live in the South, Southeast. Mostly Latinos, Southwest, South Florida. U.S. map, The purple represent people of color. The lower half of the country is where mostly people of color live. Now, there are a few of us up in Maine, 3 or 4. Zip code is the best predictor of health and well-being. Here's a zip code map. Economic wealth or economic prosperity in the map. Look at the blue areas represent the prosperity. The brown area, I was told that's not brown, that's salmon. And I told this young person, I said, well, I have a PhD in sociology, not Creole. I didn't have salmon in my box. Well, the salmon area, that's represent the economic distressed area. Where you live can impact your health. The light area represents low life expectancy, and you can see the pattern. The healthiest states, look at the conspicuous absence of the southern states. Mississippi, Alabama, the poorest. 10 out of 10 of the unhealthiest states in the country are in the southern United States. The worst place to be a kid, the light yellow across the bottom of the half of the country in terms of children health issues. The salmon area represents food insecurity by congressional districts. The dark brown area represents no car, no grocery store, food deserts, access. This is a map of obesity. Mississippi is the most obese, and Colorado is the skinniest. And we agreed, Colorado, mountain high, air, bean sprouts, tofu, marijuana. This is the poverty map, going across the southern states in terms of that heavy blue is heavy poverty. This is inactivity, blue. That map is lazy map. And then your diabetes, and then obesity. This is heart disease, heavy red. Stroke, purple. Cancer, see the pattern? No insurance, uninsured, look at that pattern. Map. I call this a stupid map. This is the map where the states, blue and blue, say, we don't want Obamacare. They sued, went all the way to the Supreme Court, lost. Here the orange represents states that say we're not going to be part of expand Medicaid. We want our people to do what? Die. Here's a map that shows you the states that are highest uninsured, red. Look at the red and the percentage. This is what Obamacare did. Yellow is good, red is bad. Fuel red. Works. So, last slide. Just sustainable communities in the area of climate change. Any climate policy, any activity that's going to address environmental justice and climate change and economic justice, all these things must be related. Sustainability. Equity must be at the center. We must be dealing with families below poverty, dealing with health, wealth gap, and we must bring equity into the mainframe. Not as a footnote, but as a part of the process and part of the formula. An equity lens must be part of any plan when it comes to climate, comes to environment, when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to health, transportation, energy, all these things. So, going back to my original slide, intersectionality. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I'm optimistic. I'm an optimist. I've seen a lot of change, but we still have a lot of work to do. And as I said before, every social movement that's been successful, progressive movement in this country, has had a strong youth and student component. And when we talk about environmental justice and climate justice and health equity, these movements will need young people, and will need students, and will need people with energy. And I think we will get there, but it's going to take a lot of work. Thank you very much.
Hello? We're going to open things up for some Q&A now, so if you would like to ask any questions at all to our fine guests here, please raise your hand. I can bring you the mic.
Hi, thank you for that talk. It was amazing. Question for you. Who's done it well? You gave a lot of examples of failures and what's not gone well in the past. Has anybody, any city, anywhere done something well that you could point to as a positive example?
Well, there are lots of examples of how communities have turned a lot of those maps, those stories that make you angry, and the whole idea is to make you angry and make you want to do something. As a matter of fact, there's a training that's going on this weekend in Atlanta looking at climate in the Southeast, and they're bringing community groups from all over the Southeast to work on climate justice and equity. There's work in Harlem, West Harlem Environmental Action. There's work in New Orleans post-Katrina. There's work in a number of communities in Chicago that's going on, in Houston, in post-Harvey. As a matter of fact, it took a hurricane to get environmental groups, civil rights groups, faith-based groups, and groups that are dealing with schools together, and we formed a coalition, CEER, Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience, CER, SEER. And this coalition, it's like 35 organizations coming together to work on issues around issues of disaster response, but also equity. Now, it's a group that I wanted justice, equity, but they said CJ, SEER, so we settled for SEER. Anyway, the idea is that you're looking at this disaster as an opportunity to talk about redirecting resources and redirecting power. Houston is 75% people of color, but you wouldn't know it from who's running what and the organizations that are out there doing stuff. And so we said we have to create more organizations and people of color organizations and bring them into the fold so that people can speak for themselves. And so we are beginning to do that. We're working with the organizations to, Houston is the only major city in the country that doesn't have zoning. And we're the fourth largest city that doesn't have zoning. We have what's called unrestrained capitalism, which means you got the money, you can do any damn thing you want to do. And so we're saying that needs to flip. The money should follow me, not money following money, money following power, money following whites. And that 25% white population historically has been the tail that wags the dog. It's a small population, but it has so much power that it's being using that power to distort that majority. And so what we're saying is, and after the last election, the 2018 election, it changed a whole lot. I mean, it looks a whole lot different post 2018 election than pre. And again, bringing more people into the idea that communities can plan for, can do for themselves, and can make change, and the majority should be able to rule. And when we talk about how resources are being allocated and which communities can talk about getting buyouts and which communities can get resources targeted in need, as opposed to all the money flowing over there because they got the power, they got the influence, and they got connection. So this is an opportunity to try to use this disaster to change a lot of things and learn from what was not done that could have been done after Katrina. When you had a clean slate, you could have done a lot of things, but because there are economic forces and powerful political forces trying to keep it like it was or make it like it was, and like it was so unequal. That's what we're coming up against. But as I said, there are lots of examples that are going on. They're flying below the radar for good reason, because when you get noticed, you get noticed. And they start going after you and audits and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Yes.
I'm wondering how.
Microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I noted the point where you talked about how equity won't be there unless equity is insisted upon. And I'm wondering, especially our school being on Kumeyaay land, if you think that that equity portion can incorporate itself like into the mascots of schools and portrayal of like that spatial portion.
I think there equity can take so many forms, but I think it has to be authentic. It can't be a checkbox. It has to be authentic, and it has to be built into the process and becomes part of the DNA of whatever it is. There's a lot of resilience planning going on across the country in almost every major city. And every major city is working on sustainability plan, climate action plan, and other kinds of plans, housing, affordable housing. These things are transportation. These things are all related. And I think the equity lens and the equity justice lens needs to be adopted across the board and not just be put over here in the Office of Environmental Equity, but it has to be spread throughout. So that template can somehow crosswalk no matter what the area that you're dealing with. And land use planning, looking at community university partnerships, community-based participatory research. In my Houston study, we were doing community-based participatory research before we even had a name. And my thing is, this stuff works. You get the community involved. The community can advise you and tell you what they want, and you can assist and support. You train them in doing the work so that the power flows with the community, and your staff, you're supporting. Universities can do a lot, and students can do a lot in partnering with communities on a lot of these issues. And there's a lot of great work going on now, and there are resources put in these projects today to try to foster that kind of work and collaboration.
Hi. Thank you so much for speaking to us. My first part is just kind of a little, just a little bit about me, because I'm from San Bernardino, California. So we're actually I think we're third in one of the poorest cities. So and I did live next to a power plant, so I just think it's crazy to just hear all about this. But my question, forgive me if it's super simple, but it's just kind of, obviously those structures weren't there before. So what do you think, when companies build them, what is the purpose for building if it wasn't there before? So I just wanted to know.
Oh, you're talking which came first kind of a deal?
Well, I mean, because, I guess that would be the question. I just kind of want to understand, obviously it's not a coincidence that they choose these areas, but from my understanding, I would just want to know, why do they feel like it's necessary to put it in a residential area when there's so much more land that's not occupied? So a lot of times these things, we looked at this, as I said, I've been looking at this for the last 40 years, and in many cases it's the path of least resistance. I remember when I was in California, there was a study, Sorrell report. They were trying to locate hazardous waste facilities. This is 92, something like that. They were trying to come up with the California Waste Board or something like that, with a policy as to how to site hazardous waste facilities in California. And this company called Sorrell, they did a report, and they laid out the characteristics of places that would be at the top of the list as to where to put it. And the report leaked out, and Congressman Waxman got the report, and the report said put it in poor communities and put it wherever, and that's what they started doing. And the first one that they started citing was in LA, was in South Central. Lancer Project was. So a lot of times it's not obvious, but in many cases it's very obvious. In the case of Houston, for example, this was a black middle-class suburban community of homeowners. Nothing out there but trees, houses, and black people. They tried to put this facility out there 10 years earlier, 70, 8 years earlier, when it was white. and city council, and the county government said this is no place to put a landfill. Same houses. The only thing different was the demographics changed. Like people moved out as demographic transition. Then it became okay. So, but again, it was not compatible. It was no, it was not. The land use is a landfill that's 1,300 feet from a school, subject to the lawsuit. That was not compatible. Even without zoning, you would say, why would you put a landfill 1,300 feet from a school? Doesn't make any sense. I mean, those photographs that I showed. I mean, these. There's so much of this stuff that goes on. I don't know. I used to teach at UC Riverside, so I know San Bernardino. But again, the idea, it doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. But because there are calculations that are made in terms of how much money you'll have to spend in terms of fighting it. And if you put it in a low-income area or an area that's unorganized, you're likely to get it through because those folks don't have lawyers, they don't have scientists, they don't have X, Y, and Z. But if you try to put it over in a wealthy area or over here, you got hell on your hand. You got people who go out, they write checks. They hire experts, they hire lawyers. So the environmental justice movement came about to assist and support those communities that generally get most of the stuff. And I've been on dozens of cases as expert witness, and I've been paid the best rate pro bono. And we used to lose a lot, but we've won a lot once we have teams of folks. The company that we did, Citizens Against Nuclear Trash, against Louisiana Energy Services, it took 9 years. The company spent like $30-something million trying to get that permit. And we bankrupted them, put them out of business. And that land right now is basically still rural, it's farmland. There's nothing out there but people, and they love that area. I mean, when they did the environmental impact statement underneath the National Environmental Policy Act, they said there's nothing out there but trees. There's nobody out there. Now, we proved that wrong. There's 2 communities that were sandwiched between the facility where they're going to build it, Forest Grove and Center Spring. One was founded in 1865, and it was founded in 1910. They were invisible. They didn't count. And I did the analysis, the environmental justice analysis part of the lawsuit. I ripped them apart. I tore them just a new one. It's like, and in front of the judges, we had the maps. And of course, they said no. They said permit denied. That was 1994. But again, the idea that they thought they could do it because it's a rural area, people are relatively isolated. I mean, they're not organized. They said none of the research showed that the people had wells. They fished and hunted. The closest fire station was 5 miles. I mean, it's like no analysis. But again, they were not counting on lawyers and experts. We had nuclear physicists and all kinds of economists, and again, as I said, it took from 89 to 94, however long that is. It took a long time and a lot of money. But again, we were volunteers. So you need to have awareness of what's in the area. Now you can just call it up, on Google, or you can call it up on EJ Screen from EPA, or you can call it up on anything and find out what your zip code or your address, and it'll tell you exactly what's in the area. Whereas before, people don't even buy houses, don't even know what's in the area. Unaware.
Can you say more about that EPA? I don't know if people know about that as a resource.
Oh yeah, the environmental justice EJ Screen is a tool that we forced. Now, the EPA did not do this on their own. We forced them to do it, to create this tool where it has a layer of mapping in terms of a lot of health variables and environment, and you can put your address or your zip code in. It'll bring up all of the things that are in the neighborhood facilities. And with the toxic release inventory database, it's updated, where they have all of the facilities that report how much air emissions and stuff that's being released into the environment. And it's a great tool. California has the California, it's similar screen, what is it called? Huh? Right. California had one of the first ones. And again, environmental justice leaders and academics were important in getting that moving along. It's a very useful tool to show you what's where and who lives there, and try to and use it as a planning tool at the city, county, state level to deal with policy and disproportionate impact of certain types of facilities located geographically. It also can be used in terms of planning when it comes to parks and green space and deal with transportation and all those other things. So mapping is very important now, and so that having those tools can level the playing field. That pool communities can use the same data when they go and testify in these hearings about what's needed, where the food deserts are, where the park deserts are, where the hot spots are, and what needs to happen in terms of long-range planning, that kind of thing. So that's where the technology and putting those skills in the hands of real people, frontline communities, is very important and very useful.
Hi, thank you.
Hey.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for that presentation. I'm a huge fan. Your work has informed a lot of my master's thesis here with San Diego State. So I know a lot of EJ folks and scholars in the 90s and 2000s have been saying that the work of the EPA, it was kind of counterproductive or more undermined EJ principles rather than reinforce them. They failed to implement Title VI and the executive order by former President Clinton. Just wondering what you had to say about the progress or lack of progress that has been made on there, and also us working in local government, what you would like to see for local, state, and federal government to work for legal enforcement and how to incorporate EJ principles in our work.
Yeah. Well, the Environmental Justice Executive Order 18298 was signed in 1994, in February. It's never been implemented fully. It's not a law, it's an executive order based on two laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, it says no federal funds can be used to discriminate based on race, color, and national origin. And then the other act, 1969 National Environmental Policy Act, which says before a major project can go forward, there must be assessments made, environmental impacts assessed. And those two laws, when you combine them, can be very powerful tools if enforced in a way that you're trying to address inequity and discrimination and disparities, low income and minority. Civil Rights Act doesn't deal with income, whereas NEPA can. National Environmental Policy Act can deal with low income whites or low income populations, period. We've had ups, downs when it comes to the executive order. And as I said, it's never been enforced. And the fact that we have 50 states and all the states are not created equal. And some states have tried to move beyond what the federal government will do or not do. And so you get more action in a state like California versus a state like where I live. I mean, the Texas see the executive order and environmental justice and equal protection. They see it as a nuisance. They want to build stuff and get it done quick. They don't care about who's going to get knocked over, blown up, or hurt. And so you have lax enforcement at the state level, where laws are delegated to the state to carry out. And if the state basically is looked the other way or in cahoots with the industry, then you get this unevenness. And if the federal government basically is saying, well, this is not one of our priorities, then you have the same state saying it's not our priority. So that's where the states, the big gaps are. And I had some other maps to show that would show exactly where those gaps are in terms of implementation and in terms of moving forward with clean energy portfolios and climate action plans and dealing with civil rights, etc. The Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, as it relates to the EPA, they've never found, it's almost like they can't see discrimination, even when it's right in their face. Most of the cases get dismissed, thrown out. And when people are saying, well, they go for justice at the federal level because their states have not done a good job. That's how the civil rights movement basically was set up, because states generally would not give civil rights equal protection to the citizens, to the residents. And a lot of people look to the federal government as the final place to get justice. But if you don't get it from the federal and you don't get it at the states, it's almost like there's nothing going on. So we have to push to get more stringent enforcement of civil rights laws across the board. And stop this dismantling of civil rights. Dismantling and reinterpretation of what the Supreme Court, the 2001 Alexander v. Sandoval decision, basically, the U.S. Supreme Court basically made it more difficult to show discrimination, because you have to show intent as opposed to looking at the effect test, disparate impact. So it's very difficult to prove intent. But again, even when you can show, like we had intent, we had letters in Tennessee, and we were ready to go to court. They settled. Letters saying, white folks, don't drink this water. Black folks, drink it, no harm. It says, no harm, no harm. We know you'll die, but no harm, no harm. We had letters showing that, black and white. Smoking gun, but again, it took 9 years. They kept fighting, but they finally settled. Civil rights enforcement, when it comes to education, employment, voting, housing, health, all these things are related. You start unraveling equal protection when it comes to voting, that impacts unraveling when it comes to health, when it comes to housing, when it comes to employment, when it comes to voting, all of that. So it's all connected. And right now, we are in a fight at the federal level to get things, get the federal government to exercise its oversight, and well, as in California, the federal government is trying to, in terms of EPA, is trying to push California back into the days when California said we want to do our own thing when it comes to Clean Air Act, and again, California has always led and had more stringent regulations when it comes to Clean Air Act. Cars in California were always different. People in California were always different. And my thing is, let California be California. And most of the stuff, that progressive stuff, generally, eventually, generally it'll come east.
Hey, good evening, Dr. Bullard. Simplified that, by the way. I just had a quick question on intersectionality, as obviously it's been an issue since the founding of our nation and arguably throughout the world historically, even before that. So I guess my question would be in communication. Like, how do you suggest we best communicate to the people that might feel threatened, that they're losing an advantage, or maybe negatively being affected by the growth of equality? Not only in the race discussion, but as well as the gender gap.
Yeah.
And of course, what's the best way for us to get involved at the local level that can then make, lasting impact?
Yeah. I think it's important. Yeah, the inequality piece just jumps out at you. It is not by accident that the vast majority of grassroots leaders in the environmental justice movement are women. And warriors. And again, when I did the People Call Directory way back in 91, and I think the last one I did in 2000, 75% of the leaders of grassroots environmental justice organizations were women. And whereas if you look at the mainstream green groups, it's totally different. It's more men, disproportionately men. And so the gender issue is important. And I think a lot of if you look at it from a global perspective, if there are resources that are put in place to address the gender inequality, and if you look at the climate lens, you will address a big part of a lot of the problem when it comes to solutions. The same thing is true here. Inequality, gender inequality, racial and ethnic inequality, and spatial inequality are part of that larger issue of how this country is really going in the wrong direction when it comes to leveling the playing field and providing opportunity that's not based on having the most money. And if you look at that map in terms of economic mobility, I mean, there are some things that you can start addressing in terms of opening up the educational opportunity and providing more access, and in terms of economic, in terms of jobs, in terms of growing more and more small businesses, etc. These are things that can be done to shorten that span between those who are on the inside and those on the outside. Those who are not moving up and those who are basically either who are decreasing in their wealth and decreasing in their income and falling behind in terms of education, in terms of communities, neighborhoods, in terms of housing, ownership, etc. These are all things that we know will play a role in policies that we move forward. Whether it's a comprehensive strategy that will deal with environmental, economic, racial, gender, climate. I mean, those are things that, some of that stuff is in the Green New Deal. But again, how we make that, that concept real on the ground, get the buy-in of people that are going to say, okay, these things, like transportation is a major barrier for people to get to jobs. And like in Houston, Houston is 600 square miles, and a lot of jobs are way out. And so, if you don't have a car, you're in trouble. You might as well be on the moon because we don't have good public transit. So so transportation is a barrier to mobility. And getting to the greenest job, if you don't have a car, it's like, so you got to build transportation into the idea of what we're trying to achieve. And so that's locally, but it's also globally. You go to these COP meetings, these climate meetings, and it becomes real clear as to the disparity between, the very wealthy countries and the rest of the world, and what the rest of the world is basically trying to get out of these wealthy countries that have pretty much been the most devastating when it comes to climate impact. So a green fund makes a lot of sense if you're to try to address some of the disparities and resource gaps on a global basis. Same thing needs to be done here. Here's one.
Probably need this.
on.
Good evening, Dr. Bullard. Thanks for coming. I've read quite a few of your pieces through previous courses and completely admire your efforts to many communities. But as far as the environmental injustices that's been happening in the South, have you insinuated any kind of policies that have been adopted for those communities?
Yeah. The almost all politics is local, and what we've tried to do is to assist and support communities organizing and mobilizing, whether at the city level, the county level, and to get organizations resources so that they can speak for themselves, whether at city council meeting or at county commission meetings, or whether it's dealing with a metropolitan region-wide with their metropolitan planning organization, the MPO, for transportation, environment, and air quality, etc., to get people and their organizations in a position to speak for themselves and to impact policy. A lot of times people may not know how the process works. They don't know may not know, their organization may not know that they can impact, a transportation improvement plan, which is a 5-year plan, or long-range plans, which may be 25 to 30 years, and showing them the process, what they need to do, and how they can access, that whole process and organize and mobilize. Like in Atlanta, like this weekend, there's a training, Climate Reality. Al Gore's organization has a training for the Southeast U.S., and it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And there are groups coming in, 2,000 people in Atlanta from that southeast region to work on issues around climate. But it also includes those other issues that impact what happens when we talk about policy. And so there's the goal is to change those maps, but to understand that housing, transportation, energy, food security, parks and green space, and you start naming those areas with health at the center, you can get people to understand that you're not just talking about climate as parts per million and greenhouse gases. You're also talking about children's health. You're also talking about people access to jobs at a livable wage, the green jobs and training, etc. So that's what we're trying to do, and we're making a lot of progress. As I said, a lot of the work that's going on is below the radar, and we don't get reported in New York Times or LA Times or Houston Chronicle or Washington Post. But it's good work going on, good intergenerational work going on that I think will last for a long time, because we got young people working on this stuff now. And we need to have that intergenerational work so that when folks like me, can sit back and be an elder and say, don't do that. That ain't gonna, that's a landmine. That's a trap. You don't have to bump your head if you don't have to. And let young people, pass the baton and let them work on these issues. And because it's young people's issues. It's millennials. You talk about, 15, 20 years from now, the issues that we're talking about, if we don't do something, it's going to be worse. And some of us won't be on the scene. So the time for that is right now. And there's a lot going on right now. And there's a lot you can do. Yeah. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming, and one more time for our amazing guest speaker. Thank you so much. I just want to take this time to remind everyone that we are having one more Spring Speaker Series event. It's going to be next Wednesday, so 9 days from now, right here, same time, doors at 6:30. It'll be 2 speakers on sexual violence and public health. So all the details are on all of our social media and stuff. We hope you see you there. Thank you.